Hi, I'm Pranamya and you're watching Pages of the Globe. So if you're new to my channel, I essentially read stories. I will tell you a little bit about the author, a little bit about the historical context of the story, and then I'll read it to you. And then I'll give you an in-depth analysis of what happened, what are the themes, what are the symbols, what are the motifs, how does this relate to what is happening now today, what type of social or societal commentary is the author trying to show us, what are the subtle or not so subtle messages that are intertwined within the story. I've also read some poems on here before, but if you want to know more, feel free to check out the pinned video that is on my channel. But without further ado, let's get on with the video. So the story that I will be reading to you today is one that has been asked before. It is titled The Most Dangerous Game by Richard Connell. This is a very, very popular, very famous short story, and I have had requests to read it, so I decided why not. Just as a quick overview, The Most Dangerous Game is a very gripping short story that drops us into this suspenseful tale of survival, danger, and the blurred line between a hunter and the hunted. So it is set on this mysterious island, and the narrative explores themes of civilization, morality, and instinct through very tense, fast-paced action. It's a very classic adventure fiction with psychological depth, and it definitely keeps you hooked from start to finish without giving literally anything away. Just a little bit about the author, Richard Connell. He was born in 1893 and he passed away in 1949. He was an American author and journalist best known for his fiction and screenwriting. He was born in Poughkeepsie, New York, and he began writing at a very, very young age. And he even edited his high school and college newspapers. He went to college at Harvard. Before becoming a pretty well-known fiction author or fiction writer, he served in World War I and later worked as a journalist and advertising writer. He published The Most Dangerous Game in 1924 in Collier's Weekly, and it quickly became his most famous work. The story has been adapted into multiple films and TV episodes and is still taught widely in schools today. In addition to short stories, he has written more than 100 different screenplays and has received an Academy Award nomination for Best Original Story for the film Meet John Doe, published in 1941. His legacy definitely rests on his very sharp storytelling, clever plots, and ability to blend action with very deep philosophical questions and commentary. Without further ado, let's get on with the video. Remember to like, share, subscribe, and comment down below what short story you would like me to read next.
The Most Dangerous Game by Richard Connell. Off there, to the right, somewhere, is a large island, said Whitney. It's rather a mystery. What island is it? Rainsford asked. The old charts call it Ship Trap Island, Whitney replied. A suggestive name, isn't it? Sailors have a curious dread of the place. I don't know why. Some superstition. Can't see it, remarked Rainsford, trying to peer through the dank tropical night that was palpable as it pressed its thick, warm blackness in upon the yacht. You've got good eyes, said Whitney, with a laugh, and I've seen you pick off a moose moving in the brown fall bush at 400 yards, but even you can't see 4 miles or so through a moonless Caribbean night. Nor 4 yards, admitted Rainsford. Ugh, it's like moist black velvet. It will be light enough in Rio, promised Whitney. We should make it in a few days. I hope the Jaguar guns have come from Purdy's. We have some good hunting up in the Amazon. Great sport, hunting. The best sport in the world, agreed Rainsford. For the hunter, amended Whitney, not for the jaguar. Don't talk rot, Whitney, said Rainsford. You're a big game hunter, not a philosopher. Who cares how a jaguar feels? Perhaps the jaguar does, observed Whitney. Bah! They've no understanding. Even so, I'd rather think they understand one thing. Fear. The fear of pain and the fear of death. Nonsense, laughed Rainsford. This hot weather is making you soft, Whitney. Be a realist. The world is made up of 2 classes, The hunters and the huntees. Luckily, you and I are hunters. Do you think we've passed the island yet? I can't tell in the dark. I hope so. Why? Asked Rainsford. This place has a reputation, a bad one. Cannibals? Suggested Rainsford. Hardly. Even cannibals wouldn't live in such a godforsaken place. But it's gotten into sailor lore somehow. Didn't you notice that the crew's nerves seemed a bit jumpy today? They were a bit strange now you mention it. Even Captain Nielsen, yes, even that tough-minded old Swede who'd go up to the devil himself and ask him for a light. Those fishy blue eyes held a look I've never saw there before. All I could get out of him was, "This place has an evil name amongst seafaring men, sir." Then he said to me very gravely, "Don't you feel anything?" As if the air about us was actually poisonous. Now, you mustn't laugh when I tell you this. I did feel something like a sudden chill. There was no breeze. The sea was as flat as a plate glass window. We were drawing near the island then. What I felt was a mental chill, a sort of sudden dread. Pure imagination, said Rainsford. One superstitious sailor can taint the whole ship's company with his fear. Maybe, but sometimes I think sailors have an extra sense that tells them when they are in danger. Sometimes I think evil is a tangible thing with wavelengths, just as sound and light have. An evil place can, so to speak, broadcast vibrations of evil. Anyhow, I'm glad we're getting out of this zone. Well, I think I'll turn in for now, Rainsford. I'm not sleepy, said Rainsford. I'm going to smoke another pipe up on the afterdeck. Good night, then. See you at breakfast. Right. Good night, Whitney. There was no sound in the night as Rainsford sat there, but the muffled throb of the engine that drove the yacht swiftly through the darkness and the swish and ripple of the wash of the propeller. Rainsford, reclining in the steamer chair, indolently puffed on his favorite beer. The sensuous drowsiness of the night was on him. It's so dark, he thought, that I could sleep without my closing my eyes. The night would be my eyelids. An abrupt sound startled him. Off to the right he heard it, and his ears, expert in such matters, could not be mistaken. Again he heard the sound, and again. Somewhere off in the blackness someone had fired a gun 3 times. Rainsford sprang up and moved quickly to the rail, mystified. He strained his eyes in the direction, but it was like trying to see through a blanket. He leapt upon the rail and balanced himself there to get greater elevation. His pipe, striking a rope, was knocked from his mouth. He lunged for it. A short, hoarse cry came from his lips as he realized he had reached too far and had lost his balance. The cry was pinched off short as the blood-warm waters of the Caribbean Sea dozed over his head. He struggled up to the surface and tried to cry out, but the wash from the speeding yacht slapped him in the face, and the salt water in his open mouth made him gag and strangle. Desperately, he struck out with strong strokes after the receding lights of the yacht, but he stopped before he had swum 50 feet. A certain cool-headedness had come to him. It was not the first time he had been in a tight place. There was a chance that his cries could be heard by someone above the yacht, but the chance was slender and grew more slender as the yacht raced on. He wrestled himself out of his clothes and shouted with all of his power. The lights of the yacht became faint and ever-vanishing fireflies. Then they were blotted out entirely by the night. Rainsford remembered the shots. They had come from the right, and doggedly he swam in that direction, swimming with slow, deliberate strokes, conserving his strength. For a seemingly endless amount of time, he fought the sea. He began to count his strokes. He could do possibly 100 more, and then Rainsford heard a sound. It came from the darkness, a high screaming sound, the sound of an animal in an extremity of anguish and terror. He did not recognize the animal that made the sound. He did not try to. With fresh vitality, he swarmed round to the sound. He heard it again. Then it was cut short by another noise, crisp, staccato. "Pistol shot," muttered Rainsford, swimming on. 10 minutes of determined effort brought another sound to his ears, the most welcome he had ever heard, the muttering and growling of the sea breaking on a rocky shore. He was almost on the rocks before he saw them. On a night less calm, he would have been shattered against them. With his remaining strength, he dragged himself from the swirling waters. Jagged crags appeared to jut up into the opaqueness. He forced himself upward. Hand over hand, gasping, his hands raw, he reached a flat place at the top. Dense jungle came down to the very edge of the cliffs. What perils that tangle of trees and underbrush might hold for him did not concern Rainsford just then. All he knew was that he was safe from his enemy, the sea, and that utter wariness was on him. He flung himself down at the jungle edge and tumbled headlong into the deepest sleep of his life. When he opened his eyes, he knew from the position of the sun that it was late in the afternoon. Sleep had given him new vigor, a sharp hunger was picking at him. He looked about him almost cheerfully. When there are pistol shots, there are men. Where there are men, there is food, he thought. But what kind of men, he wondered, in so forbidding a place? An unbroken front of snarled and ragged jungle fringed the shore. He saw no sign of a trail through the closely knit web of weeds and trees. It was easier to go along the shore, and Rainsford floundered along by the water. Not far from where he landed, he stopped. Some wounded thing, by the evidence a large animal, had thrashed about in the underbrush. The jungle weeds were crushed down, and the moss was lacerated. One patch of weeds was stained crimson. A small glittering object not far away caught Rainsford's eyes, and he picked it up. It was an empty cartridge. "A 22, he remarked. "That's odd. It must have been a fairly large animal, too." The hunter had his nerve with him to tackle it with a light gun. It's clear that the brute put up a fight. I suppose the first 3 shots I heard was when the hunter flashed his quarry and wounded it. The last shot was when he trailed it here and finished it. He examined the ground closely and found what he had hoped to find, the print of hunting boots. They pointed along the cliff in the direction he had been going. Eagerly he hurried along, now slipping on a rotten log or loose stone, but making headway. Night was beginning to settle down on the island. Bleak darkness was blacking out the sea and jungle when Rainsford sighted the lights. He came upon them as he turned a crook in the coastline, and his first thought was that he had come upon a village, for there were many lights. But as he forged along, he saw, to his great astonishment, that all the lights were in one enormous building, a lofty structure with pointed towers plunging upward into the gloom. His eyes made out the shadowy outlines of the palatial chateau. It was set on a high bluff, and 3 sides of it, cliffs, dived down to where the sea licked greedy lips into the shadows. Mirage, thought Rainsford. But there was no mirage, he found, when he opened the tall, spiked iron gates. The stone steps were real enough. The massive door, with a leering gargoyle for a knocker, was real enough. Yet above it all hung an air of unreality. He lifted the knocker and it creaked up stiffly, as if it had never been used before. He let it fall, and it startled him with its booming loudness. He thought he heard steps within. The door remained closed. Again Rainsford lifted the heavy knocker and let it fall. The door opened as suddenly as if it were on a spring, and Rainsford stood blinking in the river of glaring gold light that poured out. The first thing Rainsford's eyes discerned was the largest man Rainsford had ever seen, a gigantic creature solidly made and black-bearded to the waist. In his hand the man held a long-barreled revolver, and he was pointing it straight at Rainsford's heart. Out of the snarl of beard 2 small eyes regarded Rainsford. "Don't be alarmed," said Rainsford, with a smile which he hoped was disarming. "I'm no robber. I fell off a yacht. My name is Sanger Rainsford of New York City." The menacing look in the eyes did not change, the revolver pointing as rigidly as if the giant were a statue. He gave no sign that he understood Rainsford's words, or that he had even heard them. He was dressed in uniform, a black uniform, trimmed with gray astrakhan. "I'm Sanger Rainsford of New York," Rainsford began again. "I fell off a yacht. I'm hungry." The man's only answer was to raise his thumb, the hammer of the revolver. Then Rainsford saw the man's free hand go to his forehead in a military salute. Another man was coming down the broad marble steps, an erect, slender man in evening clothes. He advanced to Rainsford and held out his hand. In a cultivated voice, marked by a slight accent that gave it added precision and deliberateness, he said, "It's a very great pleasure and honor to welcome Mr. Sanger Rainsford, the celebrated hunter, to my home." Automatically, Rainsford shook the man's hand. "I read your book about hunting snow leopards in Tibet, you see," explained the man. "I am General Zaroff." Rainsford's first impression was that the man was singularly handsome. His second was that there was an original, almost bizarre quality about the general's face. He was a tall man, past the middle age, for his hair was vivid white. But his thick eyebrows and pointed military mustache were as black as the night from which Rainsford had come. His eyes, too, were black and very bright. He had high cheekbones, a sharp-cut nose, a spare, dark face, the face of a man used to giving orders, the face of an aristocrat. Turning to the giant in uniform, the general made a sign. The giant put away his pistol, saluted, withdrew. "Ivan is an incredibly strong fellow," remarked the general, "but he has the misfortune to be deaf and dumb. A simple fellow, but I'm afraid, like all his race, is a bit of a savage." "Is he Russian?" "He is a Cossack," said the general, and his smile showed red lips and pointed teeth. "So am I." "Come," he said, "we shouldn't be chatting here. We can talk later. Now, you want clothes, food, rest. You shall have them. This is the most restful spot." Ivan had reappeared, and the general spoke to him with lips that moved but gave forth no sound. "Follow Ivan, if you please, Mr. Rainsford," said the general. "I was about to have my dinner when you came. I'll wait for you. You'll find that my clothes will fit you, I think." It was to a huge beam-ceilinged bedroom with a canopied bed big enough for 6 men that Rainsford followed the silent giant. Ivan laid out an evening suit, and Rainsford, as he put it on, noticed it came from a London tailor who ordinarily cut and sewed for none below the rank of duke. The dining room, to which Ivan conducted himself, was in many ways remarkable. There was a medieval magnificence about it. It suggested a baronial hall of feudal times with its oaken panels, its high ceilings, its vast refectory tables where 20 men could sit down to eat. About the hall were mounted heads of many animals, lions, tigers, elephants, moose, bears. Larger or more perfect specimens Rainsford had never seen. At the great table, the general was sitting alone. "You'll have a cocktail, Mr. Rainsford?" he suggested. The cocktail was surpassingly good, and Rainsford noted. The table appointments were of the finest, the linen, the crystal, the silver, the china. They were eating borscht, the rich red soup with whipped cream so dear to Russian palates. Half apologetically, General Zaroff said, "We do our best to preserve the amenities of civilization here. Please forgive any lapses. We are well off the beaten track, you know. Do you think the champagne has suffered from its long ocean trip?" "Not in the least," declared Rainsford. He was finding the general a most thoughtful and affable host, a true cosmopolite. But there was one small trait of the general's that made Rainsford uncomfortable. Whenever he looked up from his plate, he found the general studying him, appraising him narrowly. "Perhaps," said General Zaroff, "you are surprised that I recognize your name. You see, I read all books on hunting published in English, French, and Russian. I have but one passion in my life, Mr. Rainsford, and it is the hunt." "You have some wonderful heads here," said Rainsford as he ate particularly well-cooked filet mignon. "That Cape buffalo is the largest I've ever saw." "Oh, that fellow, yes, he was a monster. Did he charge you?" "Hurled me against a tree," said the general, "fractured my skull, but I got the brute." "I've always thought," said Rainsford, "that the Cape buffalo is the most dangerous of all big game." For a moment the general did not reply. He was smiling his curious red-lipped smile. Then he slowly said, "No, you are wrong, sir. The Cape buffalo is not the most dangerous big game." He sipped his wine. "Here in my preserve on the island," he said in the same slow tone, "I hunt a more dangerous game." Rainsford expressed his surprise. "Is there big game on this island?" The general nodded. "The biggest." "Really?" "Oh, it isn't here naturally, of course. I have to stock the island." "What have you imported, General?" Rainsford asked. "Tigers?" The general smiled. "No," he said. "Hunting tigers ceased to interest me some years ago. I exhausted their possibilities. You see, no thrill left in tigers, no real danger. I live for the danger, Mr. Rainsford." The general took from his pocket a gold cigarette case and offered the guest a long black cigarette with a silver tip. It was perfumed and gave off a smell like incense. "We will have some capital hunting, you and I," said the general. "I shall be most glad to have your society." "But what game?" began Rainsford. "I'll tell you," said the general. "You'll be amused, I know. I think I may say, in all modesty, that I have done a rare thing. I have invented a new sensation. May I pour you another glass of port?" "Thank you, General." The general filled both glasses and said, "God makes some men poets. Some he makes kings, some beggars. Me he made a hunter. My hand was made for the trigger, my father said. He was a very rich man with 250,000 acres in the Crimea, and he was an ardent sportsman. When I was only 5 years old, he gave me a little gun specifically made in Moscow for me to shoot sparrows with. When I shot one of his prize turkeys with it, he did not punish me. He complimented me on my marksmanship. I killed my first bear in the Caucasus when I was 10. My whole life has been one prolonged hunt. I went to the army. It was expected of noblemen's son, and for a time commanded a division of Cossack cavalry. But my real interest was always the hunt. I have hunted every kind of game in every land. It would be impossible for me to tell you how many animals I've killed. The general puffed at his cigarette. After the debacle in Russia, I left the country, for it was imprudent for an officer of the Tsar to stay there. Many noble Russians lost everything. I luckily had invested heavily in American securities, so I shall never have to open a tea room in Monte Carlo or drive a taxi in Paris. Naturally, I continued to hunt grizzlies in your Rockies, crocodiles in the Ganges, rhinoceroses in the East Africa. It was in Africa that the Cape buffalo hit me and laid me up for 6 months. As soon as I recovered, I started for the Amazon to hunt jaguars, for I had heard they were unusually cunning. They weren't. The Cossack sighed. They were no match at all for a hunter with his wits about him and a high-powered rifle. I was bitterly disappointed. I was lying in my tent with a splitting headache one night when a terrible thought pushed its way into my mind. Hunting was beginning to bore me, and hunting, remember, had been my life. I had heard that in America, businessmen often go to pieces when they give up the business that has been their life. Yes, that's so, said Rainsford. The general smiled. I had no wish to go to pieces, he said. I must do something. Now, mine is an analytical mind, Mr. Rainsford. Doubtless, that is why I enjoy the problems of the chase. No doubt, General Zaroff. So, continued the general, I asked myself why the hunt no longer fascinated me. You're much younger than me, Mr. Rainsford, and have not hunted as much, but you perhaps can guess the answer. What was it? Simply this. Hunting had ceased to be what you call a sporting proposition. It had become too easy. I had always gotten my quarry, always. There is no greater bore than perfection. The general lit a fresh cigarette. No animal had a chance with me any more. That is no boast, it is a mathematical certainty. The animal had nothing but its legs and his instinct. Instinct is no match for reason. When I thought of this, it was a tragic moment for me, I can tell you. Rainsford leaned across the table, absorbed in what his host was saying. It came to me as an inspiration what I must do, the general went on, and that was... The general smiled with the quiet smile of one who had faced an obstacle and surmounted it with success. I had to invent a new animal to hunt, he said. A new animal? You're joking. Not at all, said the general. I've never joked about hunting. I needed a new animal, so I found one. So I bought this island, built this house, and here I do my hunting. The island is perfect for all my purposes. There are jungles with a maze of traits in them, hills and swamps. But the animal, General Zaroff? Oh, said the general, it supplies me with the most exciting hunting in the world. No other hunting compares with it for an instant. Every day I hunt, and I never grow bored now, for I have a quarry with which I can match my wits. Rainsford's bewilderment showed in his face. I wanted the ideal animal to hunt, explained the general, so I said, what are the attributes of an ideal quarry? And the answer was, of course, it must have courage, cunning, and above all, it must be to reason. But no animal can reason, objected Rainsford. My dear fellow, but the general said, there is one that can. But you can't mean, gasped Rainsford. And why not? I can't believe you are serious, General Zaroff. This is a grisly joke. Why should I not be serious? I am speaking of hunting. Hunting? Great guns, General Zaroff, what you speak of is murder. The general laughed with entire good nature. He regarded Rainsford quizzically. I refuse to believe that so modern and civilized a young man as you seem to harbor romantic ideas about the value of human life. Surely your experiences in war did not make me condone cold-blooded murder, finished Rainsford stiffly. Laughter shook the general. How extraordinary droll you are, he said. One does not expect nowadays to find a young man of the educated class, even in America, with such a naive, if I may say so, mid-Victorian point of view. It's like finding a snuff box in a limousine. Ah, well, doubtless you've had Puritan ancestors. So many Americans appear to have had. I'll wager you forget about your notions when you go hunting with me. You've a genuine new thrill in store for you, Mr. Rainsford. Thank you, I'm a hunter, not a murderer. Dear me, said the general, quite unruffled. Again, that unpleasant word. But I think I can show you that your scruples are quite ill-founded. Yes? Life is for the strong. Life is for the strong, not to be lived by the strong. And, if needs to be, taken by if I win, began Ransford huskily. I'll cheerfully acknowledge myself defeat if I do not find you by midnight on the third day, said General Zaroff. My sloop will place you on the mainland near a town. The general read what Rainsford was thinking. Oh, you cannot trust me, said the Cossack. I will give you my word as a gentleman and sportsman. Of course, you in turn must agree to say nothing of your visit here. I'll agree nothing of the kind, said Rainsford. Oh, said the general, in that case, but why discuss that now? 3 days, and we can discuss that with a bottle of Veuve Clicquot. Unless, of course, the general sipped his wine. Then a businesslike air animated him. Ivan, he said to Rainsford, will supply you with hunting clothes, food, and a knife. I suggest you wear moccasins. They leave a poorer trail. I suggest, too, that you avoid the biggest swamp in the northeast corner of the island. We call it Death Swamp. There's quicksand there. One foolish fellow tried it. The deplorable part of that was Lazarus followed him. You can imagine my feelings, Mr. Rainsford. I loved Lazarus. He was the finest hound in my pack. Well, I must beg you to excuse me now. I always take a siesta after lunch. You will hardly have time for a nap, I fear. You'll want to start, no doubt. I shall not follow till dusk. Hunting at night is so much more exciting than by day, don't you think? Au revoir. General Zaroff, with a deep, curtly bow, strolled from the room. From another door came Ivan. Under one arm he carried khaki hunting clothes, a haversack of food, and a leather sheath containing a long-bladed hunting knife. His right hand rested on a cocked revolver thrust in the crimson sash around his waist. Rainsford had fought his way through the bush for 2 hours. I must keep my nerve, he said through tight teeth. He had not been entirely clear-headed when the chateau gate snapped shut behind him. His whole idea at first was to put distance between himself and General Zaroff, and to this end he had plunged along, spurred on by the sharp roars of something very like panic. Now he had got a grip on himself and had stopped, and was taking stock of himself and the situation. He saw that straight flight was futile. Inevitably, it would bring him face to face with the sea. He was in a picture with a frame of water, and its operations clearly must take place within that frame. I'll give him a trail to follow, muttered Rainsford, and he struck off from the rude path he had been following into the trackless wilderness. He executed a series of intricate loops. He doubled on his trail again and again, recalling all the lore of the fox hunt and all the dodges of the fox. Night found him on a leg weary, with hands and face lashed by the branches on a thick wooded ridge. He knew it would be insane to blunder on through the night, even if he had the strength. His need for rest was imperative, he thought. I've played the fox, now I must play the cat of the fable. A big tree with a thick trunk, outspread branches was nearby, and taking care to not leave the slightest mark, he climbed into the crotch, and stepping out onto one of the broad limbs after a fashion, rested. Rest brought him new confidence and almost a feeling of security. Even so zealous a hunter as General Zaroff could not trace him there. He told himself only the devil could follow that complicated trail through the jungle after dark. But perhaps the general was a devil. An apprehensive night crawled slowly by like a wounded snake, and sleep did not visit Rainsford, although the silence of a dead world was on the jungle. Towards morning, when the dingy gray was varnishing the sky, the cry of some startled bird focused Rainsford's attention in that direction. Something was coming through the bush, coming slowly, carefully, coming by the same winding way Rainsford had come. He flattened himself down on the limb, and through a screen of leaves almost as thick as tapestry, he watched. That which was approaching was a man. It was General Zaroff. He made his way along, with his eyes fixed in utmost concentration on the ground before him. He paused almost beneath the tree, dropped to his knees, and studied the ground. Rainsford's impulse was to hurl himself down like a panther, but he saw that in the general's right hand held something metallic, a small automatic pistol. The hunter shook his head several times as if he were puzzled. Then he straightened up and took from his case one of his black cigarettes. Its pungent, incense-like smoke floated up to Rainsford's nostrils. Rainsford held his breath. The general's eyes had left the ground and were traveling inch by inch up the tree. Rainsford froze there, every muscle tense for a spring. But the sharp eyes of the hunter stopped before they reached the limb where Rainsford lay. A smile spread over his brown face. Very deliberately, he blew a smoke ring into the air. Then he turned his back on the tree and walked carelessly away, back along the trail he had come. The swish of the underbrush against his hunting boots grew fainter and fainter. The pent-up air burst hotly from Rainsford's lungs. His first thought made him feel sick and numb. The general could follow a trail through the woods at night. He could follow an extremely difficult trail. He must have had uncanny powers. Only by the merest chance had the Cossack failed to see his quarry. Rainsford's second thought was even more terrible. It sent a shudder of cold horror through his whole being. Why had the general smiled? Why had he turned back? Rainsford did not want to believe what his reason told him was true, but the truth was as evident as the sun that had now pushed through the morning mist. The general was playing with him. The general was saving him for another day's sport. The Cossack was the cat. He was the mouse. Then it was that Rainsford knew the full meaning of terror. I will not lose my nerve. I will not. He slid down the tree and struck off again into the woods. His face was set, and he forced the machinery of his mind to function. 300 yards from his hiding place, he stopped, where a huge dead tree leaned precariously on a smaller living one. Throwing off his sack of food, Rainsford took his knife from its sheath and began to work all of his energy. The job was finished at last, and he threw himself down a fallen log 100 feet away. He did not have to wait long. The cat was coming again to play with the mouse. Following the trail with the sureness of a bloodhound came General Zaroff. Nothing escaped those searching black eyes, no crushed blade of grass, no bent twig, no mark, no matter how faint, in the moss. So intent was the Cossack on his stalking that he was upon the thing Rainsford had made before he saw it. His foot touched the protruding bow that was the trigger. Even as he touched it, the general sensed his danger and leaped back with the agility of an ape, but he was not quite quick enough. The dead tree, delicately adjusted to rest on the cut living one, crashed down and struck the general a glancing blow on the shoulder as it fell, but for his alertness he must have smashed beneath it. He staggered, but he did not fall, nor did he drop his revolver. He stood there, rubbing his injured shoulder, and Rainsford, with fear gripping his heart, heard the general's mocking laugh ring through the jungle. "Rainsford," called the general, "if you are within the sound of my voice, as I suppose you are, let me congratulate you. Not many men know how to make a Malay man-catcher. Lucky for me, I, too, have hunted in Malacca. You are proving interesting, Mr. Rainsford. I am going to now have my wound dressed. It is only a slight one, but I shall be back. I shall be back." When the general, nursing his bruised shoulder, had gone, Rainsford took up his flight again. It was a flight now, a desperate, hopeless flight, that carried him on for some hours. Dusk came, then darkness, and still he pressed on. The ground grew softer under his moccasins. The vegetation grew ranker, denser. Insects bit him savagely. Then he stepped forward and his foot sank into the ooze. He tried to wrench it back, but the muck sucked viciously at his foot, as if it were a giant leech. With a violent effort, he tore his feet loose. He knew where he was now, death swamped and its quicksand. His hands were as tight closed as if his nerve were telling him something tangible that someone in the darkness was trying to tear from his grip. The softness of the earth had given him an idea. He stepped back from quicksand, a dozen feet or so, and like a huge prehistoric beaver he began to dig. Rainsford had dug himself in France, when a second's delay meant death. That had been a placid pastime compared to his digging now. The pit grew deeper when it was above his shoulders. He climbed out and from some hard saplings cut stakes and sharpened them to a fine point. These stakes he planted into the bottom of the pit, with the point sticking up. With flying fingers he wove a rough carpet of leaves and branches, and with it he covered the mouth of the pit. Then, wet with sweat and aching with tiredness, he crouched behind the stump of a lightning-charred tree. He knew his pursuer was coming. He heard the padding sound of feet on the soft earth, and the night breeze brought him the perfume of the general's cigarette. It seemed to Rainsford that the general was coming with unusual swiftness. He was not feeling his way along foot by foot. Rainsford, crouching there, could not see the ground, nor could he see the pit. He lived a year in a minute. Then he felt an impulse to cry aloud with joy, for he heard the sharp crackle of breaking branches as the cover of the pit gave way. He heard the sharp scream of pain as the pointed stakes found their mark. He leapt up from his place of concealment. Then he cowered back. 3 feet from the pit, a man was standing with an electric torch in his hand. "You've done well, Rainsford," the voice of the general called. "Your Burmese tiger pit has claimed one of my best dogs. Again you score." "I think, Mr. Rainsford, I'll see what you can do against my whole pack. I'm going home for a rest now. Thank you for a most amusing evening." At daybreak, Rainsford, lying near the swamp, was awakened by the sound that made him know that he had new things to learn about fear. It was a distant sound, faint and wavering, but he knew it. It was the baying of a pack of hounds. Rainsford knew he could do one of 2 things. He could stay where he was and wait. That was suicide. He could flee. That was postponing the inevitable. For a moment he stood there thinking. An idea that held a wild chance came to him, and tightening his belt, he headed away from the swamp. The baying of the hounds drew nearer, and then still nearer, and ever nearer. On a ridge, Rainsford climbed a tree. Down a watercourse, not a quarter of a mile away, he could see the bush moving. Straining his eyes, he saw the lean figure of General Zaroff just ahead of him. Rainsford made out another figure whose wide shoulders surged through the tall jungle weeds. It was the giant Ivan, and he seemed pulled forward by some unseen force. Rainsford knew that Ivan must be holding the pack in leash. They would be on him any minute now. His mind worked frantically. He thought of a native trick he had learned in Uganda. He slid down the tree. He caught hold of a springy young sapling, and to it he fastened his hunting knife. With the blade pointing down the trail with a bit of wild grapevine, he tied back the sapling. Then he ran for his life. The hounds raised their voices as they hit the fresh scent. Rainsford knew now how an animal at bay feels. He had to stop to get his breath. The baying of the hounds stopped abruptly, and Rainsford's heart stopped too. They must have reached the knife. He shinned excitedly up a tree and looked back. His pursuers had stopped, but the hope that was in Rainsford's brain when he climbed died, for he saw in the shallow valley that General Zaroff was still on his feet, but Ivan was not. The knife, driven by the recoil of the springing tree, had not wholly failed. Rainsford had hardly tumbled to the ground when the pack tore up the cry again. "Nerve, nerve, nerve," he panted as he dashed along. A blue gap showed between the trees dead ahead. Ever nearer drew the hounds. Rainsford forced himself on toward the gap. He reached it. It was the shore of the sea. Across a cove, he could see the gloomy gray stone of the chateau. 20 feet below him, the sea tumbled and hissed. Rainsford hesitated. He heard the hounds. Then he leapt far out into the sea. When the general and his pack reached the place by the sea, the Cossack stopped. For a few minutes he stood, regarding the blue-green expanse of the water. He shrugged his shoulders. Then he sat down, took a drink from brandy from a silver flask, lit a cigarette, and hummed a bit from Madame Butterfly. General Zaroff had exceedingly good dinner with his great panelled dining hall that evening. With it he had a bottle of Pol Roger and half a bottle of Chambertin. 2 slight annoyances kept him from perfect enjoyment. One was the thought it would be difficult to replace Ivan. The other was that his quarry had escaped him. Of course, the American hadn't played the game, so thought the general as he tasted his after-dinner liquor. In his library he read to soothe himself from the works of Marcus Aurelius. At 10 he went to his bedroom. He was deliciously tired, he said to himself, as he locked himself in. There was a little moonlight, so before turning on his light, he went to the woods and looked down at the courtyard. He could see the great hounds, and he called, "Better luck another time," to them. Then he switched on the light. A man who had been hiding in the curtains of the bed was standing there. "Rainsford!" screamed the general. "How in God's name did you get here?" "Swam," said Rainsford. "I found it quicker than walking through the jungle." The general sucked in his breath and smiled. "I congratulate you," he said. "You have won the game." Rainsford did not smile. "I am still a beast at bay," he said in a low, hoarse voice. "Get ready, General Zaroff." The general made one of his deepest bows. "I see," he said. "Splendid. One of us is to furnish a repast for the hounds. The other will sleep in this very excellent bed. On guard, Rainsford. He had never slept in a better bed, Rainsford decided. The end. Alright, so that was The Most Dangerous Game by Richard Connell. This story follows Sanger Rainsford, who is a very seasoned hunter, and he falls overboard and washes up on Ship Trap Island, which is this mysterious place that is feared by sailors. There he meets this general named General Zaroff, and he is this Russian aristocrat, and he is a fellow hunting enthusiast. Zaroff reveals that he has grown bored with hunting animals, and now he hunts the only prey that can actually reason and that, have some type of skill, which is humans. Rainsford becomes the next target, leading to a deadly game of survival. So let's do a quick character analysis, right? First, we have Rainsford. He is a very dynamic character, right? First, he has this very cold, detached view of hunting, right? He himself says that the world is made up of two classes, the hunters and the huntees. But we see that as he is being hunted by Zaroff, he experiences things like empathy and fear, and that leads to personal growth. He proves resourceful, resilient, and morally complex, and he ends up killing Zaroff. But the final line where he says, that it says he had never slept in a better bed, Rainsford decided, hints at ambiguity. Because now it's has he become Zaroff, right? Who is Zaroff? Well, he is he's very sophisticated, right? He is this Russian aristocrat. But he's also psychopathic. He's well-read and cultured and incredibly rich, but he's morally bankrupt. He is a symbol of civilization masking savagery. He discusses hunting literal humans and killing them over fine wine and classical music. And he justifies murder with twisted logic, believing that the strong are entitled to dominate the weak. The only other character that we really see is Ivan, who is Zaroff's mute assistant, and he is just this brute force, and he kind of represents blind obedience and physical threat. He is almost like a foil, I would say, a character foil, which if you don't know what a character foil is, it is just a character that is the complete opposite of another character. So I would say he is a foil to Zaroff, his boss, because Zaroff is smaller, and he is incredibly smart, and he's very refined, and he's very graceful, I would almost say, with his the way he moves around, and he's handsome, whereas Ivan is this dumb brute force who is just incredibly strong but not very bright. Now, what are some themes that we see in the story, right? What is some symbolism? Well, first of all, themes, there's civilization versus savagery. The author kind of shows how thin the veneer of civilization truly is. Zaroff represents himself as this refined aristocrat, but he commits literal barbaric acts by hunting humans for sport. Rainsford, who begins as a firm believer that in human superiority over animals, gradually confronts this moral gray area between the hunter and the hunted. By the end of the day, or by the end of the 3 days, he ends up killing Zaroff, which arguably adopts his own brand of savagery. Then what is another thing we see? We see hunter versus the hunted, right? The story inverts traditional roles. So Rainsford is the hunter in the beginning, and he becomes the prey. This reversal forces him and the reader to kind of empathize with the hunter. Now we aren't seeing, or with the hunted, sorry. Now we aren't seeing the prey be animals who can't think or can't reason. Now they are literal humans. Zaroff sees hunting as an art with no regard for the value of life, right? Human or animal. And he, by exposing this dehumanizing mindset, that can come with extreme power and detachment. He shows this to Rainsford, and he ends up dying by this exact mindset. Now, the last theme is moral relativism and the justification of violence. So how does Zaroff justify his actions? Well, he does it by using very twisted logic. He says only the strong deserve to live, right? This type of ideology questions the ethics of superiority and power. Rainsford initially shares a similar lack of empathy for animals. He talks about, who cares how a jaguar feels and things like that. But eventually, he gains a new perspective when he becomes a prey himself. Some symbols we see, the island is like isolation from laws, morality, and social constraints. It very much reminded me of Lord of the Flies, the island serves as a microcosm where true human nature is tested. If you like the story at all, please read The Lord of the Flies. It is a novel, and it is very similar to this in the way that a plane crashes at an island, and the plane is filled with schoolboys. The plane's only job was to take boys away from England because some type of war was happening there. And, they needed to be flown to America, I'm assuming. And the plane crashed onto this unknown island. No one else is there. And, they're there by themselves. And it's a group of, teenage boys. Some of them are incredibly young, actually. They're, 5. And then some are, 16, maybe. And we kind of just see how they, go crazy. Another piece of symbolism is the jungle. It represents chaos, danger, and this is kind of our instinct side, as Rainsford is going through the jungle and navigating it, he is being stripped of his humanity, of civilization, and he is being forced to become more and more animalistic and wild. Some social commentary that we see in here. First of all, this is I would say a very obvious critique of social Darwinism. So Zaroff's ideology reflects the distorted interpretations of Darwin's theories, which is survival of the fittest, and that kind of becomes justification for literal murder and domination. So the author kind of challenges this by showing how such views strip away humanity and moral responsibility. There's also a lot of commentary on war and colonialism. This was written in post-World War II, so the story reflects anxieties about the brutality and dehumanization that modern warfare and imperialism entail. Then there's Zaroff, a Russian general, and he kind of symbolizes disillusionment with aristocratic war heroes who wield power without conscience. Then there's also class and privilege. Zaroff's ability to escape justice due to his wealth and status critiques how power shields immortality. Rainsford's eventual victory could be seen as a reclamation of human dignity over privilege, though his final act of killing Zaroff complicates this by a lot. As for the ending and my interpretation of it, I would say that when Rainsford kills Zaroff and sleeps in his bed, that's a very ambiguous moment, right? On one hand, it shows triumph of the prey over the predator. At first, you're excited. You're yes, thank God he finally killed the crazy man. But on the other, it may hint that Rainsford has adopted Zaroff's worldview, becoming what he once despised. I mean, if you think about it, what was Rainsford's job, right? He was not supposed to kill Zaroff. He was just supposed to make sure that Zaroff doesn't kill him for 3 days, and then he would be able to go back home. But instead, he ends up killing him and killing Zaroff and then sleeping in Zaroff's bed, which kind of symbolizes his moral descent. And I guess you can't blame him. I mean, he, at the cost of his innocence, he had survival. He had to survive. However, it is definitely interesting what happens. I would say the story is more than just a suspenseful survival story. It's very disturbing, and it is, it talks a lot about the fragility of morality, and I feel especially in those times, the thrill of the hunt, even now, the thrill of the hunt was a big thing, but there is a darkness that lies just beneath the surface of all of this, and the author kind of forces the readers not to question only the ethics, not only to question the ethics of violence, but also how easily we can just slip from hunter to hunted and possibly back again. That is it for today. Remember to like, share, subscribe, and comment down below which short story you would like me to read next.